I've been following this site for a while because it really digs into some of the salient points that need to be made about austerity. You know, and your book is about austerity. And austerity is a very confusing concept here in the UK because it was launched to trim the debt, and yet the debt has doubled.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't appear to... But so what's the point of it?
Well, it's just bogus austerity. It's kind of a myth. It's sort of almost a fig leaf in order essentially to confiscate public assets to put them in the private space. That's really is the entire point. By that chap there.
This chap here. This is the Osborne baby. He's just he's just putting good income producing British assets into the hands of foreign pension funds.
Absolutely.
Essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the short way to look at it, and I mean, what's really staggering is that this year, I mean, we always think of privatisation, what's the worst government for privatisation? We tend to go to Thatcher. But actually, Osborne this year will have privatised, sold off more public assets than her two biggest privatising chancellors. So
that's a stunning statistic.
It really is. I mean, Geoffrey Howe, her first chancellor, and then Nigel Lawson, who people will remember as sort of the bad guys of the, you know, in the 1980s. You know, they had a whole decade, and they privatised around £56 billion in today's money of public sector assets. And Osborne, in 6 years, will have privatised £58 billion. That's by the end of this year. By the end of this Parliament, David Cameron would have been the Prime Minister that has sold off more public assets than any other Prime Minister in UK history, ever.
What I don't think is very fair is that the government is not really communicating the truth.
Yeah.
That they are transitioning away from a welfare state to a American-style winner-take-all hyper-capitalist state. And as a result, a lot of people are committing suicide because they're not really being... I think if people were told more honestly what's really going on, they'd be able to adjust psychologically. But when you make a transition like this in a whipsaw fashion and you don't really communicate honestly to people, and you keep telling them that the NHS is not being privatized, you keep telling them that the state's not being privatized, while you're privatizing, you've got a number of suicides now.
I mean, they're hitting them from two angles. So suicide rates have now gone up 22% since they came into power in 2010. And actually, around 600 suicides between 2010 and 2013 have been directly linked to these work capability assessments that the Department of Work and Pensions have been conducting. So this is where you take people who are sick, they might have long-term illnesses, terminal illnesses, severe disabilities that currently bar them from the workplace, and they're dragged in and have this company. It used to be Atos. For the time frame that this University of Oxford study was completed, it would have been Atos. It's now Maximus. And they put them through this horrible physical test. And basically designed to throw as many people out of the social security safety net as possible, and you know, blanket label essentially anyone who depends on the welfare state as suspect. You know, they're probably a scrounger. And the Oxford University study found that 590 people had actually killed themselves as a direct result of stress associated with these work assessments. And actually 279,000 acute mental health crises as a direct result of these work capability assessments. This is just horrific. I mean, if you look at some of the cases as well, I mean, they can move you to tears. There was one woman, a 49-year-old Linda Wotton. She's on 10 medications a day. She's had a double lung transplant. She gets dragged into a work capability assessment. She's dying in a hospital bed the day that they receive a letter from the DWP saying she's fit to work. 9 days later, she died. And her husband said, you know, he's there reading this letter while he's watching his wife choke to death on her own bodily fluids.
No, this is the reality of those statistics. Cameron's Britain.
Yeah,
this is Osborne's Britain.
That's Osborne's Britain. That's kind of the way they like it. I mean, I don't...
But you actually have people starving to death, right?
Yeah. People are literally starving to death. You've got homeless guys like Daniel Gauntlet in Ashford in Kent, who they put in this anti-squatting law. He froze to death a couple of years ago on the porch of a bungalow in Kent, 2 days after another homeless man in Kent had frozen to death in the same conditions because they could no longer squat in the empty properties. So they were actually literally freezing to death. We had a homeless guys, a rash of homeless people dying in wheelie bins, where they were literally crawling into wheelie bins to get some comfort, you know, from the elements at night, and then getting crushed.
Let's move up the socioeconomic ladder for a second, because British citizens and residents to austerity, they're being lost to suicide. But let's move up the socioeconomic scale a little bit, because the
very different.
The middle class taxpayer is also losing billions and billions and billions to Osborne-led privatizations. Right? So they're trying to push as many people down into the gutter and then scapegoat them. And then either they kill themselves or they starve to death, and they say, well, there's nothing we can do. This market fundamentalism. George Osborne, the Taliban of capitalism, doesn't care.
He really doesn't. I mean, you're right to go up the socio-economic scale, because essentially what you've got at the bottom, you've got people dying. You know, at the middle classes, you've got people killing themselves. You know, because they're working, they're earning salaries which should be affording them a decent quality of life. And then because of this privatisation, essentially you go from a state where the public has funded and built, extraordinary services, the NHS, the train services, the utility systems over time. And then what you have them do is sell these assets at massive losses. I mean, Osborne lost £26 billion just in the last 12 months on these privatisations. So we're selling them off to his mates at bargain basement prices. And then obviously we still need the service, so we're then renting back the service from those people at astronomically more expensive prices.
You're selling the cow to buy the milk.
Completely. Utility bills are going up, what is it, 60%?
And these utilities are owned by foreign pensioners.
Completely.
So these Germans are on a beach somewhere, and as you go into the underground or health service, you're paying their pensions.
Same, energy is predominantly, foreign state-owned companies. So actually, you're giving nuclear energy to China. You've given a chunk of the train services to France and Germany.
So train rates keep going up in London, so that German pensioners who are on a state pension can get a better chaise lounge on the beach.
Absolutely. And while this absolutely insidious circumstances are unfolding, you have this completely disingenuous kind of talk coming out of Downing Street. You've got Osborne and Cameron claiming this great patriotism, trying to ring the nationalism bell when it comes to immigration and those issues. And actually, the stuff they're doing is a far greater threat to the Britain in everyday circumstance than these poor refugees that are just trying to flee Syria. It's like where they're having us focus on other people who are suffering, rather than focusing on the real crimes that are going on in our own country.
Well, just because there's no checks and balances.
Zero
in terms of media.
Absolutely.
So Osborne and Cameron can lie through their teeth.
Yeah.
And the BBC just says, that's the way it is.
And the BBC is that's just a classic case. You've got Rona Fairhead now, who's heading up the BBC.
From HSBC.
She has £500,000 worth of shares in HSBC. What's one of the biggest banking scandals at the moment? HSBC, $1 billion scam on the members of the
Stephanie
public.
Flanders, remember, she was on Newsnight.
Where is
Never
she
reported on J.P. Morgan scandals. Never did a report on J.P. Morgan scandals. Where's she work now? Oh, J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, was stunning surprise.
Where'd little baby say?
And that revolving door is crazy. It's across the piece. It's not only media executives that are transferring over into the financial services sector that they have supported so well during their time as media executives. You've even got politicians, and this is cross-party.
So people kill themselves because they look at the BBC. They say, well, the BBC just told me that everything the government's doing is good. I must be the problem. I'm not worth living in this country. I'll kill myself. And Osborne's like, well, that's one less person we have to bother with on our privatization schemes. We don't care. It's basically scapegoating and ethnic cleansing, or
absolutely
social cleansing. Not ethnic cleansing, but social cleansing.
And we're covering it. I mean, the work you've done on this is huge as well, around the social cleansing in London, and also the fact that the way these people make money now, they don't even rely so much on the surf level of working class. Producing things that they can sell. The way they financialise the economy means that actually they don't have the same reliance on those working people anymore.
No, because the central bank can print money.
Completely.
Just like Saudi Arabia can essentially pump oil to feed the princes. They don't need workers, so they treat them like dirt.
Yep.
In this country, they don't need taxable income. They can just print money and they give it to bankers who then go buy chalets in Switzerland, et cetera. But they don't need a worker. Workers are unneeded. They're superfluous to a financialized economy. You mentioned these assets being sold off at rock bottom prices. Of course, reminds me of Gordon Brown selling something like 300 tons or more of Britain's gold at one of the worst prices in decades and decades to bail out some Goldman Sachs bankers, if I remember the story correctly, totally destroyed the sovereignty of the country in terms of their reserves. Now people in countries are buying gold aggressively because they realize that these fiat currencies are collapsing.
Absolutely.
What about TTIP, TTIP? What? This obviously, it's weird because they're having this discussion about should we or should we not stay with the EU.
Yeah, moot.
But they're letting in TTIP.
Yeah, I mean, it's a moot point. It's such a huge irony that they kind of carp on about this, the threat of, UK sovereignty by these, European bureaucrats. And the single greatest threat to our, national sovereignty at the moment is a trade deal that is secret. I mean, it's entirely secret. I was actually having dinner. I was interviewing a member of the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago who had literally never heard of TTIP. And you sit there and go, but this is, when
Again,
it comes
there's
to
no
science,
media coverage.
sovereignty,
No media coverage.
public services, nothing, absolutely silent. It's so hard to then break through and reach people, with this stuff. Because first of all, it's TTIP, it sounds dry. Trade deal, it sounds dry. But it is something that has such huge ramifications.
A foreign
It's effectively
fracking
the end of
company,
the NHS.
a foreign fracking company can come into the UK, frack, cause damage, cause huge environmental damage, leave a huge debt onto the balance sheet of the UK public, leave, and then sue Britain for any perceived damages because they didn't make enough money. And then Britain, under TTIP and these other global trade deals, has to raise taxes to pay this foreign company.
Yep. And it's already,
that's the deal.
It's already
that's an example of the deal.
That's an example. Ditto the NHS. So essentially any domestic policy that could be perceived to have threatened the commercial interests of a company, you can end up suing the national government. And
they have to raise taxes to pay them.
Transnational court. And so your taxes go up, you lose the NHS, you lose...
All right, we're about out of time. Tell us about the Canary, this site. It's going like gangbusters. Talk about it. We got about 30 seconds.
Awesome. So, the Canary is set up really to disrupt the media model. Our primary purpose is to dismantle austerity, to dismantle
What's the website address?
It's called thecanary.co.
And what's the Twitter handle?
Twitter handle is @theCanarySays. And you can read us every day. We write 7 days a week.
Yeah, I read it every day. It's one of my number one sources of news and information about the UK austerity catastrophe that's unfolding. Anyway, Carrie-Anne, thanks for being on the Kesier Report. See you again soon. That's going to do it for this edition of the Kesier Report with me, Max Kesier, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Carrie-Anne Mendoza. She's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of thecanary.co. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kesier Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.